Welcome to our channel, a quiet corner for true stories about love, loss, and the hard-won grace that sometimes follows. If this kind of story speaks to you, where family isn't a perfect photograph but a room full of complicated people, consider subscribing so you don't miss the chapters to come. Today's story is titled, "Nobody from my family came to my husband's funeral, not even my parents nor my best friend." My name is Nina. I was 32 years old the morning they lowered my husband, Michael, into the earth. The rain had the decency to fall softly, as if even the weather understood that some goodbyes should not be shouted. A man in a dark coat said words that people lean on when language breaks, and a small, kind woman pressed a tissue into my hand the way strangers do when they recognize a sorrow they've seen before. When the first thud of dirt touched the lid, a sound as small as a knock, I thought, so this is how a lifetime closes. I stood alone. Not alone in the cosmic sense. We are never truly alone, my husband used to say, but alone in the way that counts in a parking lot after a service you planned for a man you loved, checking your phone and finding 22 missed calls from people who didn't show. Not my parents. Not my younger sister, Rachel. Not Jessica, who once shared her French fries with me at a junior high lunch table and told me we'd be old ladies together, loud and unembarrassed. They all had their reasons, and that morning those reasons felt like stones against my ribs. Michael would have smiled at the rain. He was an engineer, the kind who did not just solve problems but loved the elegance of a good solution. He used to catch raindrops on his palm and predict the storm, as if the sky had mailed him a letter and he could already read the ending. He was good at endings, at making them gentle. When it's time, he told me months earlier, his voice thin but steady, "Promise me you won't make a war out of saying goodbye. Just let it be what it is." I nodded then, not because I was brave, but because he needed to see me try. We met in a library where the air was a polite hush and the shelves were heavy with other people's lives. He bumped my stack of psychology books and they toppled like dominoes. A lesser man would have laughed or kept walking. He knelt instead, handed me a highlighter I didn't know I'd dropped, and said something like, "I think we've made a mess of things." We sat for coffee that afternoon. Coffee turned to dinner. Dinner to a late movie where our hands found each other in the dark like two magnets cut from one shape. People think love arrives with thunder. Ours arrived like a light turning on in a room we didn't know was there. You learn the outlines of a family early, who speaks first at dinner, who gets the last piece of cake, who is called promising, and who is called sweet. In my family, Rachel shone. She had the kind of beauty that makes cameras stand up straight and waiters remember her name. She climbed fast, law school, a prestigious firm, parties where the napkins had gold edges. My parents liked rooms with chandeliers and people with titles. Michael did not have a title. His father was a mechanic who could coax life from a stubborn engine. His mother was a nurse who knew how to listen for pain beneath the words. My parents never said, "not good enough," not outright, but they were fluent in the grammar of disappointment. The tight smile, the question that was not a question. "Are you sure he can provide?" The sigh that lasted one heartbeat too long. It is a small act of rebellion to love simply when the world around you is impressed by spectacle. We married in a hall with simple lights, a band that played off-key but tried, and a cake my aunt made herself, the frosting uneven at the edges. Michael's friends danced like joy was something that could be worn out with use. My parents posed for photographs and left early. Rachel texted through the toasts. Jessica, my maid of honor, stood beside me with careful eyes, the eyes of someone measuring two worlds and trying to keep a foot in both. If a family is a compass, mine always spun toward the North Star of appearance. There is a double standard that grows like mold on the inside of such homes. When I didn't have children, I was asked what was wrong. When Rachel didn't have children, she was told there was no rush. If I brought a casserole, I was practical. If she brought dessert, she was thoughtful. I used to joke that in our house, competence was respect's poor cousin. Michael would squeeze my hand under the table and shake his head, not out of scorn, but a kind of mercy. "Let's go home," he'd whisper when the conversation turned. Home, where the couch sagged kindly, and the window looked onto a street of trees that didn't care what anyone did for a living. All of this matters because of what happened later. Because love, if it is real, must do more than hold hands under string lights. It must stand up when the doctor clears her throat and uses words like aggressive and stage and months. It must learn hospital rhythms, the beep, the shift, the silence at 3 a.m., when even the nurses walk softly. It must pour soup that is not eaten and laugh at jokes that miss the mark and kiss the bald head that used to house a mess of curls. Love must learn to be a verb. 6 months before the morning with the rain, Michael collapsed on a run. We hoped for dehydration, a simple fix. It was not. The MRI was a black and white map with a storm brewing in a place storms do the most harm. We got a second opinion to be thorough, a third to be responsible, and then we stopped counting opinions because the truth had settled in the room and would not leave. My parents said words that sounded like concern and landed like policy. Doctors can be dramatic. Stay positive. Have you tried? Rachel sent a heart emoji and a photo of a ring she might get soon. Jessica promised to visit, then sent late texts about work and her mother's back and the way weeks sometimes disappeared under errands. If you have ever loved someone through illness, you know the shape your life takes. Your calendar becomes a moat around them. You learn what pills can be crushed and what must be swallowed whole. You memorize the line on their face that means enough for today. You fear the quiet more than noise. Michael apologized to me for the mess his body was making. "I hate this for you," he said one night, and I wanted to tell him that loving him was not a task but a privilege. Instead, I adjusted the blanket and told him about the neighbor's dog and how the leaves were beginning to blush on the trees. Sometimes small talk is a lifeline. In families like mine, big news travels fast when it is good. Bad news takes the scenic route. I sent updates, each one a little more raw, as if honesty could unlock something. My parents came once and stayed 30 minutes. Rachel didn't come at all. Jessica brought a smoothie and I watched her check the time twice, an old habit of hers when she wanted to leave but hadn't found the exit line yet. "People show up differently in crisis," Michael said, not as an excuse but as a diagnosis. He was still an engineer. He liked to name the problem. When the fall came and the air thinned, there was talk of an engagement party. Rachel's at a country club where the grass is a color green you only see on postcards. The date they chose fell like a coin on the table. Heads, the party; tails, the last of Michael's days at home. I asked my mother for a kinder calendar. She asked me for a kinder tone. "Your sister only gets engaged once," she said. "Your husband is dying," I said back. Michael squeezed my hand then. "Let it be," he whispered. "Stay here with me. That's enough." On the morning of the funeral, no one from my first family came. Not because they were lost or sick or stuck on a plane, but because the celebration had stretched long, because mimosas come with refills, because sometimes people choose what sparkles and forget that the most important things are rarely shiny. If I sound bitter, forgive me. I am telling you what happened, not what I wish had happened. A woman who loses her husband learns to tell the truth because there is no time for anything less. After the service, I waited by my car longer than I needed to, pretending to look for my keys, which were in my hand. Grief is not just sadness, it is logistics. Where to go next? Who to call? How to be a person while the world keeps its normal schedule? My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "We need to talk now." Below it, familiar names and missed calls, as if the absence itself was dialing me back. If you have ever stood alone in a parking lot on a day like that, you know the way the smallest sounds are suddenly loud. The click of a door, the zipper on a purse, raindrops on your coat. I set the phone face down and listened to the rain. Michael would have said it sounded like applause. I chose to believe him. Grief does not arrive all at once. It creeps in, a tide that pulls you back even when you think you've found ground. The morning after the funeral, I sat on the edge of our bed, still his side though he wasn't there, and stared at the dent his body had left in the mattress. I pressed my palm into it, trying to make the fabric rise again as if the shape of him could be coaxed back. The silence in the room was not empty. It was swollen, like the air itself remembered and refused to move on. Michael's toothbrush was still in the cup by the sink. His favorite coffee mug, chipped near the rim, sat by the stove. These were relics, and yet they felt alive in their ordinariness. That was the paradox. The most ordinary things become unbearable after loss. Folding laundry, I would pause at his t-shirts and wonder what to do, wash them and risk losing his scent, or leave them and risk the mold of neglect. Love makes these tiny debates monumental. My phone buzzed. A new message from my mother. We need to talk now. The words were urgent, but not about grief. They never were. Beneath that, a stack of missed calls, all within the same hour, as though guilt had a schedule. There was no "we're on our way," no "we're outside," just insistence that I should be available on their terms. The world of their party still echoed in their timing. I want to tell you something about Michael. He believed in small dreams, a house with a yard, a dog that would dig holes I'd complain about but secretly enjoy, a daughter who might have his dark eyes and my stubborn streak. Ordinary things are extraordinary when you build them together, he said once while balancing our grocery budget. He was not a man of extravagant words, but when he spoke, it was like someone was placing a lantern in a dark hallway. You could suddenly see a few steps ahead. We fought for that life. My family made it clear they didn't approve. Connections matter, my father said often, as though a Rolodex was a second inheritance. My mother spoke about comfort, about lifestyles we might deserve, but Michael taught me a different arithmetic. That comfort is not marble countertops or country club memberships. It's the sound of someone unlocking the door every night, the security of a laugh in the kitchen, the peace of a hand reaching for yours under the blanket. We had a small wedding, the kind you pay for yourselves because every dollar has weight. The photographs are not glossy magazine spreads. They are slightly blurry, some off-center, but they capture truth. The curve of Michael's smile when he saw me walk toward him, the way my veil caught in the wind, the joy of friends who did not measure worth in wealth. I remember Rachel scrolling on her phone during the toasts, her face lit by someone else's attention. I remember Jessica trying to bridge both sides, sitting at Rachel's table more often than by mine. Even then, I mistook her absence as loyalty conflict rather than a choice. When you grow up in a family that practices favoritism like a religion, you learn not to expect fairness. Rachel's achievements were gold-framed. Mine were polite footnotes. If I earned, it was survival. If she earned, it was brilliance. At Christmas, she unwrapped jewelry that sparkled. I unwrapped socks you'll find useful. You begin to wonder quietly if usefulness is all you are meant for, and yet I carried on. Michael's love filled in the blanks where validation should have been. But when illness came, when stage 4 brain cancer was the sentence no one could appeal, those blanks became craters. I thought perhaps naively that my parents would soften, that the word terminal would pierce even the hardest heart. Instead, they changed the subject. They pivoted to Rachel's boyfriend, to wedding planning, to parties at the club. My news was too inconvenient for their calendar. Jessica cried at first, promised weekends, then disappeared behind excuses, deadlines, family obligations, a sudden cold. I began to realize promises are only as strong as the will behind them. Michael endured treatments with a grace that shamed me. Radiation, chemotherapy, endless needles. His body grew thin, his hair fell away, yet he still found ways to laugh. He once whispered, "Let's sneak in milkshakes, Nina. They can't forbid happiness." So I did. We drank chocolate milkshakes in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fear, and for 10 minutes we pretended the world was kind. One night, as I wept quietly beside his bed, he squeezed my hand and said, "People show up differently in crisis. Some can't stand to look at suffering. Forgive them, even if they don't deserve it." That was Michael, always handing out compassion even when his own supply was running thin. But forgiveness is not amnesia. I could not forget the empty spaces at the hospital, the silence from my family, the friend who became a ghost. When Rachel announced her engagement, the timing was cruel in its precision. The party was set for the same weekend doctors had warned me to prepare for the end. My mother, bright with excitement, told me, "Surely you can leave him for one evening. Rachel only gets engaged once." I nearly dropped the phone. My husband was dying, and to her, it was an inconvenient overlap on the family calendar. That was when I began to understand. Their absence at his funeral would not be an accident. It would be a choice. And yet, standing at his grave that rainy morning, I still hoped. I scanned the path for a familiar silhouette, the bend of my father's shoulders, the perfume of my mother, Jessica's careful walk in heels. But there was only the shuffle of strangers, kind strangers, who had come because Michael mattered to them. Not to share bloodlines, but to share humanity. That morning taught me something I had ignored for years. Family is not always who shares your last name. Sometimes it is who brings you a tissue without being asked. I walked away from the cemetery with my shoes sinking in wet soil, my heart hollow but somehow sharp. Grief had emptied me, but betrayal had carved me open. I knew then that the story was not only about losing Michael. It was about losing the illusion of family I had carried like a childhood blanket long past its warmth. Grief is a strange mirror. It shows you not only what you've lost, but also what was never really there. In the days after Michael's funeral, I found myself replaying not only his last words, but also the countless moments where my family had chosen Rachel over me. It wasn't just absence at a funeral. It was a pattern woven through decades, invisible until loss sharpened the contrast. I remembered being 17, standing on stage at my high school graduation, scanning the audience for my parents. They weren't there. Later, I learned they'd gone to Rachel's dance recital instead. "We couldn't be in two places at once," my mother explained as though that settled it. At Christmas, Rachel's gifts glittered while mine sat in plain boxes labeled practical. Socks, a planner, kitchenware. Love measured not in thought but in utility. And when Jessica, my so-called best friend, whispered after one particularly harsh Thanksgiving, "Your family is tough, but they love you in their way," I believed her. I wanted to believe her, because what was the alternative? To admit I had no real place in my own family. Michael saw it long before I did. He told me once, "They don't treat you with basic respect." I defended them out of habit more than conviction. "They just don't understand him," I would say. "They mean well." But meaning well is a weak defense when cruelty becomes routine. He was patient, though. He loved me not in spite of my blind spots, but with the hope that one day I would take off the glasses they had placed on me. Our marriage was not grand. We lived in a small apartment where the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV. We pinched pennies to travel, explored second-hand bookstores, celebrated birthdays with homemade dinners. I worked as a marketing coordinator, while Michael, with brilliance and grit, carved a career as a project engineer in renewable energy. We didn't have much, but we had enough, and more importantly, we had each other. but with each family gathering, the cracks widened. At dinners, my mother would ask me, "When are you going to give us grandchildren?" 10 minutes later, she'd turn to Rachel and say, "Focus on your career, sweetheart. Children can wait." The double standard was so blatant it felt almost rehearsed. Rachel was the rising star, I was the afterthought. Jessica saw it all. She had been there since childhood, seen my tears after disappointments, but slowly she shifted her seat closer to Rachel. At my own wedding, I caught her laughing at Rachel's jokes about the modest catering. That was the beginning of her quiet betrayal. Still, I held on. I told myself that blood was thicker than water. That history meant loyalty. I excused their slights, minimized the pain, and focused on the love Michael gave me, because he made me feel enough, more than enough. And as long as he was there, the emptiness left by others felt bearable. Then came the headaches, the fatigue. At first, we blamed long hours. Michael was the kind of man who pushed himself past exhaustion, eager to prove not only his intelligence, but also his worth. But when he collapsed during a morning run, reality struck like a hammer. Stage 4 brain cancer, a prognosis that left no room for denial. I called my parents, my voice breaking. My mother's tone was almost casual. "Doctors exaggerate, stay positive." She pivoted to Rachel's boyfriend and their possible engagement, as if news of impending joy could drown out the sound of death knocking at our door. My father was even colder. "Have you gotten a second opinion?" As though diligence could undo the truth. Jessica's reaction at first gave me hope. Tears, promises to help. But then came the cancellations. The excuses, work deadlines, family obligations, a cold, a text. "I promise I'll visit this weekend." Followed by silence. Promises without action are just a softer form of abandonment. Michael fought with courage. Radiation made him sick. Chemotherapy stripped him of his strength, his hair, his weight. I became nurse, advocate, and caretaker. I learned to measure medication in the dark, to catch his weight when he faltered, to feed him when food itself seemed cruel. I gave up my job, drained our savings, and slept in hospital recliners. My family, meanwhile, visited once 30 minutes of awkward silence before they excused themselves. Rachel never came at all. Jessica appeared twice, restless and distracted, her eyes darting to the door like a prisoner counting minutes. Michael noticed my exhaustion. "You're carrying too much," he whispered one night, his hand trembling as it held mine. "Don't let this break you permanently. Promise me you'll find joy again." I nodded, though joy felt like a foreign country I'd never return to. Still, I promised, because promises were sacred to Michael, and I could not deny him that. Then came Rachel's engagement announcement. My mother's voice, bright with pride, bubbled through the phone. "We're planning the most beautiful party. The country club has agreed to host it. Rachel wants you to be a bridesmaid, of course." I asked the date, my heart heavy. 3 weeks from Saturday. The very window doctors had told me to prepare for the end. "Mom, Michael is not doing well. I can't leave him." There was silence. Then, in a voice colder than I'd ever heard, she said, "Your sister is only going to get engaged once. Surely Michael would understand if you took one evening to celebrate." "He's dying, Mom." My voice cracked. "My husband is dying." "Well, we'll miss you at the party. I'll tell Rachel you send congratulations." It was then I understood. They had chosen. Chosen glitter over grief, champagne over compassion, celebration over solidarity. The people who were supposed to show up for me, my parents, my sister, my best friend, were already rehearsing their excuses for absence. And yet, some foolish, wounded part of me still hoped that when the moment came, they would surprise me. That hope kept me upright. That hope was all I had left. The human heart has a way of bargaining with itself. Even when the evidence piles up, even when disappointment becomes routine, there remains a stubborn corner that whispers, "Maybe this time will be different." I clung to that whisper in the weeks after Rachel's party was announced. as Michael's health declined more rapidly than even his doctors had predicted. Every day became a lesson in small mercies. I learned how to make broth he could keep down, how to rub his temples when the headaches clawed through his skull, how to laugh at his jokes even when my chest was tight with fear. "I'm becoming a skeleton version of myself," he said once, pulling at the waistband of his loose pajamas. "You still look better than half the guys in the city," I teased, and he grinned. Humor was his rebellion against the disease, and I tried to match him, even when my throat burned with unshed tears. Hospitals have a way of stripping away illusions. The sterile white walls, the constant beeping monitors, the parade of nurses and doctors. It all forces you into the raw truth of what matters. Michael's parents flew in from out of town, renting a small apartment just to be closer. They took turns with me, sitting by his bed, praying quietly or telling stories about his childhood. His father fixed a leaky faucet in our kitchen. His mother folded my laundry while I napped. These gestures may sound small, but to someone drowning, even the smallest hand feels like salvation. My own family, meanwhile, remained distant. I sent texts, updates on treatments, on seizures, on the doctor's growing concern. The replies were short. "Stay strong. Thinking of you. Prayers. Never we're on our way, never how can we help." Rachel never replied at all. Jessica, when she did, was vague. "I'll try to stop by soon." But the visits didn't come. And then came the night Michael collapsed again. His body, already weak, convulsed in a seizure that left me screaming for nurses and praying through tears. The doctors stabilized him but delivered the words I had dreaded since the diagnosis. "We are out of options." The kindest doctor I had ever met, Dr. Patterson, looked at me with eyes full of sorrow. "At this point, our goal is comfort. Hospice care would be the most compassionate path." Hospice. That word felt like a verdict. Not just the end of treatment, but the official surrender of hope. I sat by Michael's side that night, watching his chest rise and fall, memorizing the rhythm because I knew one day soon it would stop. His skin was pale, his veins blue beneath the surface, but in his sleep he looked peaceful. For a moment, he was the boy I'd met in the library again, the one who knocked over my books and insisted on coffee. I whispered, "I'm here. I'll always be here." The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I texted my father asking for financial help. Our savings were gone, eaten by bills insurance wouldn't cover, by the cost of unpaid leave, by the 1,000 invisible expenses that come with dying. His reply came quickly. "We're a bit stretched right now with Rachel's engagement party. Maybe next month we can look at our budget." Next month. By then, Michael would likely be gone. The cruelty of it landed in my chest like a stone. Still, I kept sending updates. Kept hoping the gravity of Michael's condition would finally pierce their bubble. "He's been moved to hospice," I texted. "The doctors say it could be days." My mother replied with, "Sending prayers. Did you see the photo of Rachel's engagement ring? 6 carats. Jessica texted, "So sorry, I've been swamped helping Rachel plan. I'll try to visit soon." Michael saw my despair. He was so weak he could barely speak, yet he reached for my hand and whispered, "Promise me something. Promise me you'll take care of yourself after. Promise me you won't let this break you." His eyes, those dark, steady eyes, held me still. I wanted to scream that I couldn't promise, that the world without him was unimaginable. But I nodded, because he needed me to. Because love sometimes means lying, not to deceive but to give peace. The night before Rachel's engagement party, Michael's breathing grew shallow. The hospice nurse increased his morphine, her eyes kind but heavy with knowledge. I called my mother. "He may not make it through the night. Please, I need you here." She sighed. "We have guests arriving from out of town. Rachel would be devastated if we weren't here to greet them." "My husband is dying," I cried, my voice breaking. "Lower your voice," she scolded. "You're being dramatic. People die every day. Your sister only gets engaged once." I hung up, my hands shaking, the phone nearly slipping from my grip. Desperate, I called Jessica. "Please," I begged. "I can't do this alone." Her reply, "I'm at the salon with Rachel. We're getting our hair done for tomorrow. I'm so sorry, Nina. I promised weeks ago." At 3:27 a.m., Michael slipped away. His parents and I held his hands as his last breath left him, a soft exhale that carried 34 years of life. His final words to me, spoken hours earlier, were, "Thank you for loving me." I kissed his forehead and whispered, "Always." By dawn, I was a widow. I sat with his body until the funeral home came, my fingers laced with his even as the warmth faded. Outside, the city moved on, cars honking, people hurrying to work, life continuing as if nothing monumental had happened. For me, the world had ended. And when I checked my phone, I found silence. Not from his parents, who held me as I sobbed, but from my own blood. No messages, no calls. They were still asleep, preparing for Rachel's big day, while my world collapsed. Grief has a way of stripping time of its order. The days after Michael's passing blurred into one long, gray stretch, punctuated only by the sound of my phone buzzing with hollow messages. "So sad. Thinking of you. We'll pray." The words were thin, like tissue paper trying to cover a fire. Michael and I had talked about his funeral in the weeks before. He wanted it simple. "No heavy rituals," he told me. "No priest who didn't know me pretending he did. Just music, some laughter if people can manage it, and maybe scatter me near Lake Michigan. Remember our first anniversary there? That's where I want part of me to rest." It was the kind of request only Michael would make, humble, rooted not in grandeur but in memory. So I honored him. I chose a plain wooden casket for the viewing, a blue ceramic urn the exact shade of his eyes, and white roses mixed with forget-me-nots for the service. The funeral director, kind but brisk, guided me through paperwork with a voice softened by repetition. "Would you like an obituary?" he asked, as though such a thing could sum up Michael's life. I wrote one anyway, each word feeling inadequate. How do you compress brilliance, kindness, humor, and love into 2 paragraphs for the local paper? I scheduled the funeral for Tuesday, 3 days after his death. I told myself this gave my family enough time. Surely now, with the party over, they would come. I created a Facebook event, sent emails with directions, texted the details directly. I even received what looked like promises. "Mom, we'll try our best to be there. Rachel is exhausted from the party, but we know this is important too. Dad, I'll check my calendar. Rachel, a simple thumbs-up emoji. Jessica, I'll definitely be there early to help you set up. Just let me know what you need. Love you." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. Someone from my past life would stand beside me. At least Jessica. Tuesday morning dawned gray, drizzle streaking the windows, as though the sky itself carried grief. I dressed in a simple black dress I had ordered online in haste, slipped on shoes that felt too formal, and drove to the funeral home. Michael's parents were waiting. His mother embraced me, whispering, "We're here for you today and always." I clung to her words like a rope. I checked my phone, 8:15 a.m., no sign of Jessica, no message from my family. I texted her, "Are you on your way?" Silence. At 8:30, the funeral director approached. "Mrs. Wilson, would you like a private moment with your husband before guests arrive?" I nodded, my throat tight. In the chapel, Michael's casket rested among flowers, most sent by his colleagues, neighbors, friends. His parents had ordered a large arrangement. I had chosen the smaller bouquet myself, forget-me-nots threaded through white roses. Nothing from my family, not even a card. At 9:00, guests began arriving. His co-workers, college friends, even our elderly neighbor who shuffled in with a cane. They offered hugs, shared stories of his kindness, spoke of projects he had led that would continue to impact communities long after his death. Their presence stitched together some of the gaping hole in my chest. 9:30. Still no Jessica. No family. My phone remained mute. At 10:00, the service began. I sat between Michael's parents, painfully aware of the empty row behind me, the row I had reserved for my parents, my sister, my lifelong friend. The celebrant spoke of Michael's life, his brilliance, his compassion. Friends stood to share memories that made me laugh through tears. His boss spoke about Michael's work in renewable energy, how his innovations would live on. And then it was my turn. Standing before a crowd that was not mine but his, I unfolded the paper I had written on the night he died. My voice shook as I told them about the man who had loved me with patience, who had taught me that the simplest dreams were the richest, who had held my hand through every disappointment my family had delivered. I wanted to collapse, but I stood tall, because Michael would have wanted me to. As I spoke, my phone vibrated in my purse, a notification. Against my better judgment, I glanced down. It was from Rachel, an Instagram story, a photo from her engagement party. She and Bradford grinning, champagne glasses raised. My parents on either side, radiant. Jessica in the background, laughing mid-toast. The timestamp read yesterday, not Saturday. They had extended the party into multiple days while I was choosing Michael's burial clothes. The world tilted. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My husband's funeral, empty of family, while they clinked glasses in glittering rooms, mocking the crisis I had begged them to share. I finished my eulogy, though I barely remember how. My body moved on muscle memory, my mouth spoke words my heart could hardly form. And then, as the service closed, I whispered a line I had once said to Michael on our anniversary. I love you more than yesterday, less than tomorrow. It was my vow to him, even now. As the pallbearers prepared to take him to his final place, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text from my mother, "We need to talk now." Below it, 22 missed calls from her, my father, Rachel, even Jessica, all within the last hour. But in that moment, standing at the edge of his grave, I knew what mattered. I turned the phone off, slipped it into my purse, and watched as the first shovel of dirt struck the casket. The sound was final, heavy, unyielding. I whispered into the drizzle, "Goodbye, love." When the last handful of dirt was patted down and the mourners began to drift away, I stood by Michael's grave until the drizzle turned to steady rain. His parents waited a few steps behind, giving me space, their umbrellas like wings protecting me from collapsing entirely. I whispered the words I'd said to him every night of our marriage. I love you more than yesterday, less than tomorrow. And then I walked away, not because I was ready, but because the living always have to walk away. The house felt unbearably empty when I returned. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, running my fingers across his books, his jacket still hanging by the door, the faint scent of his cologne lingering like a memory refusing to leave. The silence pressed in on me, heavier than grief itself. And then my phone began to buzz, vibrating against the counter until it seemed almost angry at my neglect. I turned it over. Dozens of messages poured in. From my mother, "Nina, we are so sorry we couldn't make it." "Rachel wasn't feeling well this morning after the party. Please call us when you get this. We are worried about you." From my father, "We wanted to be there, but circumstances prevented it. Our deepest condolences." From Rachel, "Sorry about Michael. I was busy with engagement stuff. Hope the funeral went okay." And from Jessica, pages of texts, each more frantic than the last. "Nina, I'm so sorry. I overslept after the party. I know I should have come. Please, please don't shut me out. Let me explain. I'm coming over later." I dropped the phone onto the table as if it were hot to the touch. Their words rang hollow, stripped of sincerity by the photographs I'd seen, the champagne toasts, the glittering lights, the laughter at brunch. They hadn't just failed to show up. They had chosen not to, chosen to keep celebrating while I was burying the man who had been my everything. That evening, as the rain tapped against the window, an email appeared in my inbox. It was from Timothy, one of Michael's colleagues who had attended the funeral. The subject line read, "You should see this." Curiosity, dread, and anger tangled inside me as I opened it. Attached was a video clip. Timothy explained, "I was at the Grand Hotel yesterday for a business lunch. I saw your family there celebrating and thought you should know what was said. I'm so sorry, Nina." I pressed play. The camera, shaky and discreet, captured the hotel's terrace decked in balloons and flowers. My parents, Rachel and Jessica, sat at a long table, glasses in hand. Bradford, Rachel's fiancé, was giving a toast. His words were muffled but clear enough. To Rachel and the life she deserves. To family that knows how to prioritize what really matters. Applause. Laughter. Then Rachel rose, slightly unsteady, champagne in her hand. Her voice was loud, slurred with drink. "Thank you all for being here, especially my parents who put this party together despite my sister's drama." More laughter rippled through the group. Seriously, though, Nina always has some crisis going on. First marrying that nobody engineer, and now making his illness the center of attention during my engagement. Typical. I froze. The room spun. My mother reached over in the video, patting Rachel's arm as though the cruelty needed comfort. My father nodded, smiling along. And then Jessica, my Jessica, laughed. She raised her glass and added loudly enough to carry, "Nina has always exaggerated everything. Remember when she acted like being valedictorian mattered, or when she thought her little job promotion was such a big deal." The table erupted. I stopped the video while rising in my throat. It wasn't just absence. It was betrayal. They hadn't missed the funeral because of poor planning. They had mocked me, mocked Michael, while clinking glasses and calling it love. With trembling hands, I scrolled back through years of messages. Patterns emerged like scars on old skin, birthdays forgotten, milestones dismissed, insults disguised as jokes. Michael had been right all along. They didn't respect me, they never had. And now their laughter confirmed it. I sat there in the dim light of our living room, the rain outside echoing the storm inside me. For the first time in my life, I understood something with absolute clarity. The family I was born into had never truly been mine. The only real family I had was the one I had chosen, and the one I had lost at 3:27 that morning. I pressed my palm against Michael's pillow, inhaled the faint trace of him still left, and whispered, "You were right, love. I see it now." The morning after the video, I awoke to a dull pounding in my head, the kind that comes from crying yourself empty. For a brief second, I forgot. My hand reached across the bed as it always had, expecting warmth. Instead, there was only the cool stretch of sheets and a silence that pressed down like a weight. Grief is cruel that way. It lets you forget for just long enough that the remembering feels like losing him all over again. My phone was still buzzing with messages I hadn't answered. Jessica had left voicemails, her voice cracking, pleading for me to pick up. My father sent a short one, "We'll come by tomorrow at 11. We need to resolve this." My mother's tone, even in text, carried that clipped authority I'd grown up under. This family cannot stay divided. Be reasonable. And Rachel, of course, was silent. At 10:45 sharp the next day, the security camera Michael had insisted on installing lit up. On the porch stood my parents, Rachel in designer heels, and Jessica clutching a bottle of wine like it was her passport back into my life. They looked impatient, rehearsed. I called Susan, my colleague-turned-friend, who had looped in her husband Richard, an estate attorney, to review the trust documents my parents had pushed on me by email. His voice on the phone was grave. "Nina, they want you to sign away your inheritance. If you agree, everything diverts to Rachel. Don't sign. Don't let them pressure you today. When I opened the door, my mother swept past me first, her perfume sharp, her words sharper. Finally, we've been trying to reach you. Michael has been dead for 24 hours, I corrected. You've been trying for one. Rachel dropped onto the couch, scrolling through her phone as if this were an inconvenience sandwiched between brunches. My father carried a briefcase. Jessica hovered near the door, eyes red but not from grief, more like shame she didn't yet have the courage to name. We're worried about you, my mother said, though her expression was not worry but irritation. Isolating yourself isn't healthy. Come stay with us for a while. My father added, we just need you to sign some updated paperwork. A formality. Paperwork? I asked, my voice steady. You mean the documents that remove me from the family trust? Their faces flickered, shock, then indignation. That was private, my father sputtered. I walked to the table, opened my laptop, and turned the screen toward them. Do you know what this is? I asked. A spreadsheet, carefully built over sleepless nights, displayed birthdays, graduations, holidays. Every moment they had overlooked me while celebrating Rachel. The expensive gifts she received versus the practical ones I did. The recitals they attended instead of my graduation. The trips they funded for her while I scraped for student loans. 28 years of evidence. This is ridiculous, my mother scoffed, keeping score like a child. No, I said quietly, this is me finally seeing the truth. You've never loved me the way you love Rachel, and now you've shown me you don't love me at all. Rachel rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with disdain. Oh, please, are we still on this? It was just a party, a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. And Michael's funeral wasn't. My words cut the air. Rachel shrugged. People die every day. I'll only get engaged once. Statistically speaking, I replied coldly, with your record, probably more than once. Her face flushed crimson. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and pressed play. The video Timothy had sent filled the room with their laughter, their words, their cruelty. The silence that followed was deafening. My father tried first. That was out of context. What context, I asked, makes mocking my dying husband acceptable? Jessica opened her mouth, eyes wet. Nina, I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I said. You all did. Every word was what you truly felt. For the first time, they looked small, stripped of excuses, but I felt no triumph, only a hollow ache like finally pulling a thorn that had been buried for decades. Get out, I whispered. My mother stiffened. Be reasonable. No, I've been reasonable my whole life. Not anymore. My voice grew stronger. From this moment forward, I have no parents, no sister, no friend named Jessica. You are all strangers to me now. Jessica stepped forward, tears spilling. Please, Nina, 20 years of friendship, don't throw that away. You threw it away, I said, calm now, like the truth had finally set. Not me. One by one, they filed out. Rachel huffed indignantly. My father looked ashamed. Jessica lingered last, her voice breaking. I'll do anything to make this right. There's nothing left to save, I said and closed the door. Behind it, I leaned against the wood, my body trembling. For the first time in my life, the illusion was gone. I was truly alone. Alone in grief, yes, but also, maybe, finally free. That night, the house felt darker than it ever had before. Not because the lamps were off, but because something inside me had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after you slam a door on the only family you've ever known. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the unopened bottle of wine Jessica had left behind on the porch, when she realized I wouldn't let her in. A peace offering or maybe a bribe. Either way, it sat there untouched, a symbol of everything I had just severed. Michael's absence was already unbearable, but the truth was harsher. I hadn't just lost a husband. I had lost the illusion of family. For 32 years, I had convinced myself that if I worked harder, if I bent further, if I forgave quicker, one day they would see me, love me, choose me. Now the truth was undeniable, they never would. I couldn't sleep, so I wandered into Michael's office, where his blueprints and notebooks still lay open. I ran my fingers across his handwriting, neat and certain, and whispered, "You were right. They don't treat me with respect." It felt like speaking to a ghost, but also to the one person who had always seen clearly. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I called a therapist. Her name was Dr. Laurel Anderson, a specialist in grief and family trauma. "You're carrying 2 losses," she said in our first session. "The man you loved and the family you thought you had. That's called complex grief. It's like trying to heal a wound while someone keeps reopening it." Her words landed in me like truth finally spoken aloud. She explained another term, disenfranchised grief. The kind of grief unacknowledged by the people who should support you. When your family dismisses your pain, it creates another trauma layered over the first. You're grieving alone, which makes healing harder. I cried then not just for Michael, but for the years of silence, the missed graduations, the Christmas mornings where my joy had been secondhand. 3 weeks after the funeral, I walked into a church basement for my first widow's support group. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the chairs were metal and cold, but the women who sat in them carried something I desperately needed, understanding. There were 8 of us, ranging in age from a woman in her 20s to another in her 70s. Grief made us equals. We shared stories of hospital beds, of paperwork, of empty kitchens where laughter used to live. One woman, Sarah, who had lost her husband to a heart attack, told me, "The first 2 months I wore his bathrobe every day and ate cereal for dinner. Then one morning I realized Steve would have hated that, so I started doing one grown-up thing each day. Shower, cook, go for a walk, just one thing." I clung to that advice. Some days my one thing was folding laundry. Other days it was going outside, feeling the sun on my face. They weren't victories exactly, but they were steps. Michael's parents became my lifeline. His mother would send care packages, homemade cookies, silly socks, even crossword puzzles clipped from her local paper. His father helped me navigate the mountain of insurance forms, fixing things around the apartment that Michael would have handled. "You'll always be our daughter," his mother told me, hugging me tightly. "That doesn't change because he's gone." Their love was a stark contrast to the hollow messages from my own parents who called occasionally, leaving voicemails about healing the rift. Rachel sent one text, "You're being ridiculous. Call Mom and Dad and apologize." I deleted it without answering. Jessica, though, was relentless. Emails, handwritten notes slipped under my door, text after text begging for a second chance. "I messed up," she wrote. "I got caught up in Rachel's world. Please don't erase 20 years of friendship." But the ache in me was too deep. I read her words with dry eyes, no longer even angry, just empty. Months passed. I returned to work part-time, my boss kind enough to grant flexible hours. My coworkers gave me space without pity, and for that I was grateful. On weekends, I volunteered at the hospital where Michael had been treated, sitting with cancer patients during chemo, holding hands when families were too tired to stay. At first, it was painful, memories flooding back, but slowly it became healing. To give what I wished I'd been given, presence. One evening, while cleaning out Michael's nightstand, I found a sealed envelope. My breath caught. On the front, in his handwriting, were the words, "For Nina." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a 3-page letter he had written during his final weeks. "My dearest Nina," it began. "If you are reading this, I am gone. I'm sorry I had to leave you. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You are stronger than you know. I have watched you bend under the weight of a family that never valued you, but you never broke. Now I want you to use that strength for yourself. Don't just survive. Thrive. Build a life filled with people who see your heart the way I always have." I pressed the letter to my chest and wept. His voice was gone, but his words remained. a map guiding me toward a future I hadn't yet believed was possible. That night, for the first time since his death, I felt something shift. The grief was still there. It always would be. But beneath it, a small ember of hope flickered. Not for reconciliation with my family, not for the return of what I had lost, but for a new life. A life where love would no longer mean begging for scraps. Winter had begun to thaw by the time I finally packed away Michael's clothes. Each shirt I folded carried a memory. The plaid button-down he wore on our first trip to Chicago, the navy suit from our wedding, the faded college hoodie he loved more than anything else in his closet. I pressed each one to my face, breathing in the faint trace of him, terrified of the day when even that smell would be gone. Grief is a thief, but it is also a miser. It hoards every detail, refusing to let go even when letting go is mercy. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting. It meant making choices. I sold the apartment we had shared because every corner echoed with absence. I found a smaller place near a park, somewhere I could walk and breathe. On moving day, I discovered another note from Michael tucked into a book I had never finished. P.S. Don't let them convince you you're hard to love. My hands trembled as I read it. He had known. He had always known. By then, my parents' calls had dwindled to occasional voicemails. "We want to move forward as a family," my mother said once, as though family were a contract that could be renegotiated after breach. My father urged me to let bygones be bygones. But bygones don't bury husbands. Bygones don't skip funerals. Rachel never reached out except for one curt text. "Stop being dramatic. We all had obligations." Obligations, what a thin word to stand in the place of love. Jessica was different. Her attempts at reconciliation never stopped. Letters, texts, even cards slipped under my door. She wrote about missing me, about realizing how toxic Rachel's orbit had been, about the weight of her guilt. Sometimes I wanted to respond, if only to tell her how deeply she had cut me. But I didn't. Silence, I realized, was the only language left between us. Dr. Anderson reminded me, boundaries are not revenge. They are self-protection. You are not punishing them. You are preserving yourself. Her words became a shield on the days I doubted myself, the days I thought about answering just to make the noise stop. In my new apartment, I began to build routines. I joined a community center writing group, where I started sharing blog posts about grief. To my surprise, people read them. Comments trickled in. "This is exactly how I feel. Thank you for putting words to what I couldn't say." For the first time, my pain was not just a wound, but a bridge. The community that formed around those writings became another kind of family, strangers who knew me in the most honest way. Volunteering at the hospital deepened, too. At first, I only sat with patients during treatments. Later, I began organizing small activities, music afternoons, reading sessions, even birthday celebrations with donated cupcakes. The nurses smiled at me like I belonged. One older patient, Elaine, once took my hand and said, "You have the heart of someone who's been through fire. That's the only kind of heart that can sit quietly with someone else's pain." She and her husband, Frank, who had lost their own son to cancer, began inviting me to Sunday dinners. Slowly, a new definition of family was forming around me. Michael's letter became my compass. Whenever doubt crept in, I would unfold those pages and read again. Don't just survive. Thrive. His faith in me made me braver than my fear. I started saying yes to invitations, yes to new friendships, yes to life inching forward. The guilt of moving on never fully left, but it softened. On the 1-year anniversary of his death, I returned to Lake Michigan with his parents. The sky was bright, the water a clear blue that mirrored the urn we had chosen. We scattered part of his ashes into the waves, watching them disappear into something larger than all of us. His father placed an arm around my shoulders. "He would have loved this day," he said. His mother added, And he would be so proud of you. I nodded, the lump in my throat making speech impossible. For the first time, the grief felt bearable. Not gone, never gone, but woven into me like a scar that no longer bled. That evening, as I lit a candle by his photo, an email from my mother appeared, family emergency. Your father had a heart attack. Rachel's wedding postponed. We need your help with medical bills. For a moment, the old reflex tugged at me, daughter, helper, the one who bails everyone out. But then I remembered the video, the laughter, the absence, the trust papers. Instead of calling back, I researched financial assistance programs for medical expenses and sent her the links without a single personal word. A gesture of civility, nothing more. Because love without respect is not love, and forgiveness without accountability is not healing. That night, I placed Michael's letter back in the drawer and whispered, I hear you, love. I'm building the life you wanted for me. For the first time, I believed myself. Spring came gently, as if the earth itself wanted to remind me that nothing stays frozen forever. By then, it had been more than a year since Michael's death. The sharpness of grief had dulled into something different. Not absence exactly, but a constant companion. I could laugh again, though sometimes it caught me by surprise. I could plan dinners, attend gatherings, even write about hope. And yet, every night, I still touched the photo on my nightstand and whispered, good night, love. I hadn't spoken to my parents in over a year. Their messages dwindled once they realized I wouldn't respond, though my mother still sent the occasional email, always framed around need. We're struggling with medical bills. Rachel is having a hard time, could you reach out? The subtext was always the same, come back into orbit, play your role again. But I had stepped out of that gravity. I wasn't willing to be pulled back. Jessica was the only one who lingered at the edges of my life. I heard through Sarah, the widow I'd met in group, that Jessica had left Rachel's circle. Apparently, Rachel's fiancé had broken off their engagement amid scandals at his law firm, and their friendship had soured. Jessica had tried to rebuild her life, working through therapy, but she never stopped asking about me. Sarah would say gently, she regrets it, Nina. She really does. I would nod, not with anger anymore, but with the quiet understanding that some bridges, once burned, should remain ash. On the second anniversary of Michael's death, I drove to the cemetery early. The morning air was cool, the grass damp with dew. I carried fresh flowers, white roses mixed with forget-me-nots as always, and placed them by his stone. I sat on the bench I'd installed there, tracing the letters of his name carved into granite. 2 years, love, I whispered. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime, but I'm still here. I'm still living like you asked me to. As I sat in silence, I noticed a figure approaching slowly down the path. Jessica. Her hair was less styled, her clothes more modest. She carried a small bouquet of lilies. When she saw me, she froze as if unsure whether to continue. I can come back later, she said softly. It's okay, I replied, surprising myself. You can put those down. She placed the flowers carefully beside mine and stood there awkwardly. Her voice trembled. I come every year. I didn't expect to see you today. I just needed to pay my respects. Something in her eyes was different, less polished, more real. You visit Michael's grave? I asked. She nodded. I know it doesn't make up for missing the funeral. Nothing could, but I wanted to acknowledge him properly, to remind myself of the worst mistake I ever made. We stood in silence, the weight of 2 decades of friendship and betrayal hanging between us. Finally, I asked, how have you been? Different, she said with a small laugh. Rachel and I had a falling out. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. She wanted me to take her side in everything, and I realized how toxic it all was. Therapy's helping, but losing your friendship. Her voice cracked. That's been the hardest consequence of my choices. I studied her face, searching for sincerity, and for the first time I saw it, not excuses, not spin, just regret. I don't expect forgiveness, Jessica continued. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see how badly I failed you. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I touched the headstone lightly. Michael always saw your best. He'd probably be glad you're trying. She wiped at her eyes, nodding. He always believed in people. We exchanged numbers before leaving, no promises made, but a door left slightly ajar where one had been sealed shut. That night, I hosted a small dinner at my house. Elaine and Frank from the hospital, Sarah from the support group with her new partner, and Susan and Richard, who had stood by me through the darkest days. We ate, laughed, shared stories. For a moment, the house felt full again, not with ghosts, but with life. Later, after everyone left, I sat in my garden under the stars. The air smelled of fresh soil and lilacs. I thought about Michael, about my parents, about Jessica, about the long road from that rainy funeral to this quiet evening. I whispered to the night sky, "Thank you for loving me, Michael, for showing me what I deserve. I'm building the life you wanted for me." A breeze rustled the leaves, soft and steady, and for a moment I felt as if I were being held. Not alone, never truly alone. As the seasons rolled forward, life settled into something I never thought I'd have again. Routine, punctuated by unexpected grace. I had become the facilitator of a weekly grief support workshop at the community center, the same place where I'd once walked in terrified, clutching my pain like a secret. Now I opened each session with words I had learned the hard way. Grief doesn't disappear, it changes shape, and somehow so do we. People listened, some crying quietly, others nodding with recognition. Afterward, they thanked me for saying what they couldn't yet say. Each story I heard, of sudden loss, of slow goodbyes, of fractured families, stitched me into something larger than myself. Grief had been a cage, but in that circle it became a bridge. My blog grew too. I wrote about Michael, about the nights I still reached for him, about the strange mix of sorrow and resilience. Thousands of strangers began reading. Comments came from everywhere. Widows in Ohio, daughters in California, even a soldier overseas who said my words reminded him of home. "Your writing makes me feel less alone," one message read. And in giving them comfort, I realized I was comforting myself. Meanwhile, my parents continued their quiet attempts to claw their way back into my life. A Christmas card arrived with no return address, signed only Mom and Dad. It contained a check with a note, "For medical expenses if you need it." I tore it up. Love cannot be bought in increments of guilt. Rachel's silence was louder than anything she could have said. I heard through distant cousins that her life had unraveled, Bradford gone, her law career tarnished by whispers of scandal. But I felt no triumph, only distance. Some stories you stop following because they no longer belong to you. Jessica and I texted occasionally. Tentative, careful. She'd send photos of places we used to go, our favorite diner, the park near our old school, with a note like, "Thought of you today." I never gave more than a polite response, but I didn't shut the door completely. Healing is not always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about allowing silence to grow less hostile. 2 years after Michael's death, I stood in my garden planting spring bulbs. My hands were dirty, my back ached, but there was joy in it. The earth promised flowers would come, even if I couldn't see them yet. That's when I realized I had begun to trust the future again. That evening, I hosted another dinner. Elaine and Frank brought wine, Sarah made a casserole, Susan and Richard arrived with laughter and stories. We sat around my table like family, not by blood but by choice. And in their presence, I felt something I hadn't felt since Michael, belonging. Later, under the stars, I thought of him. I still spoke to him sometimes. "You were right," I whispered into the night. "I'm stronger than I ever believed, and I'm not alone. Not anymore." The wind stirred gently through the trees, and I chose to believe it was his answer. By the 3rd year without Michael, the ache of his absence had changed. It was no longer the raw, tearing wound that left me gasping in the cereal aisle or sobbing into his shirts. It had become something quieter, like a shadow that follows you in sunlight. Always there, always present, but no longer dictating every step. I had grown into new roles: teacher, mentor, writer. The grief support workshop at the community center had expanded into 2 weekly sessions. Sometimes, when I listened to others tell their stories, I could almost hear Michael beside me, whispering his steady encouragement. "You're helping them, Nina. You're giving what you wished you had." His belief in me still guided my hand, like a compass pointing north even when the map was unclear. My writing gained traction, too. One of my essays, about finding family in unexpected places, was published in a small magazine. Strangers reached out to tell me that my words gave them courage. "I read it to my daughter," one woman wrote. "She's grieving her father, and it helped her see she's not alone." For the first time, I felt the ripple of Michael's legacy moving outward through me. His love was not gone, it was multiplied. My biological family remained absent, except for the occasional message from my mother, always wrapped in need. "Your father's medical bills are overwhelming. Rachel is struggling, can't you let go of the past?" The tone was always the same, dismissive of my pain, demanding of my loyalty. But I no longer felt pulled by those words. Boundaries, I had learned, were not walls of anger but fences of peace. Jessica, on the other hand, surprised me. One afternoon, she showed up at the hospital where I volunteered, not to see me, but because she had signed up to join the same program. I noticed her across the ward, sitting with an older patient, holding his hand while he drifted off to sleep during chemo. Her face was softer than I remembered, stripped of the constant performance she used to wear. When our eyes met, she only nodded as if to say, "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just trying to be better." And for the first time, I didn't look away. At night, my home was no longer silent in the way it once was. There was laughter from dinners with friends. Music from the piano Sarah convinced me to buy. Even the bark of a rescue dog I had adopted. A scruffy mutt named Leo who followed me from room to room as if he knew I couldn't stand being alone. Life was still fragile, but it was undeniably alive. On the 3rd anniversary of Michael's passing, I returned to Lake Michigan alone. The water shimmered under a clear sky, and the waves rolled in with a rhythm that felt eternal. I scattered the last of his ashes, whispering, "I kept my promise, love. I didn't let it break me." Tears fell, but they were gentler this time, mixed with gratitude. Standing there, I understood something I hadn't before. Grief had not ended my story. It had rewritten it. It had carved me into someone stronger, someone who demanded better, someone who finally believed she was enough. As I walked back toward the car, the wind swept across the shoreline, lifting my hair, and for a moment, it felt like Michael's hand on my shoulder. Not an absence, not even a memory, but a presence, quiet, enduring, and always, always with me. By the time the 4th year arrived, I no longer measured my life by what I had lost, but by what I had built. The apartment I once moved into out of necessity had become a home. My garden bloomed with colors Michael would have loved: bright tulips, sturdy daisies, and roses that climbed the trellis stubbornly, just as he had once climbed every obstacle. On weekends, I found myself laughing with friends around my kitchen table, their voices filling the air in a way that reminded me. Emptiness can be replaced, not with replicas, but with something entirely new. I continued leading grief workshops, and the group became a sanctuary not just for others, but for me. New widows arrived, eyes wide with shock, voices trembling. I saw myself in them, the version of me who once sat clutching a tissue, unable to speak. "You don't have to be strong today," I would tell them. "You only have to be here." And when they began to share, when tears turned to nods of recognition, I felt the circle working its quiet magic. Pain shared becomes lighter. The blog I had started as a private journal had grown into something unexpected. An editor reached out, asking if I would consider expanding my writing into a book. At first, the idea terrified me. Who was I to write a book? But then I remembered Michael's letter. Don't just survive. Thrive. Perhaps telling our story, my story, was a way of honoring him, of turning the pain into something that might guide others through their own darkness. My parents were still absent, though not silent. They sent sporadic emails, alternating between guilt and manipulation. We're older now, Nina. Time is short. Or, Rachel is trying to rebuild. Family should stick together. I no longer felt rage when I read them. Only detachment. Their absence at Michael's funeral had been the final line in a story I no longer needed to keep reading. Forgiveness, I learned, did not require reunion. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to close the door and leave it closed. Jessica, however, lingered at the edge of possibility. We spoke occasionally, usually brief exchanges. She never pushed, never begged anymore. Once she simply texted, "I'm proud of the work you're doing. Michael would be too." I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "Thank you." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something softer than silence. Maybe healing didn't mean restoring what was broken, but learning how to carry it differently. Leo, my dog, had become my shadow, his scruffy presence reminding me daily that companionship doesn't always come in the form we expect. On quiet nights, when I sat with a cup of tea and reread Michael's letter, Leo would curl against me as though to say, "You're not alone." And somehow I believed him. On the 4th anniversary of Michael's passing, I gathered my new family, Elaine and Frank, Sarah, Susan, and Richard, even some of the women from the grief group. We held a small gathering at my home, lighting candles in his memory, telling stories of the people we had loved and lost. It was not a somber event, but a warm one, filled with laughter and tears braided together. As the candles flickered, I realized that Michael's legacy lived not only in me, but in every life touched by the love we had shared. Later that night, I sat in the garden, stars scattered like promises overhead. I whispered to the sky, "I kept my vow, love. I found joy again. Not the same joy we shared, but a new one you would recognize." A breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of roses. And in that moment, I felt what I had come to believe more deeply than anything. Love never ends. It only changes form. Grief did not vanish from my life. It simply became part of the tapestry, a darker thread woven among brighter colors. I had learned that family is not always the one you are born into, but the one you gather along the way, through kindness, through presence, through the shared language of love. Michael taught me that ordinary dreams can be extraordinary when built together. His letter, his faith, and his memory continue to guide me even now. Standing here today, years later, I no longer see myself as the woman abandoned at her husband's grave. I see myself as the woman who stood back up, who planted gardens where ashes fell, who found laughter in places once filled only with silence. My story is not about being broken by betrayal. It is about choosing to rise, about daring to believe that new beginnings are possible even when the old endings nearly destroyed you. If you take anything from my journey, let it be this: you are stronger than you think, and love, real love, never leaves you. It remains in every act of kindness, in every hand that reaches out, in every breath of courage you take when the world tells you to give up. To those of you who have listened to my story, thank you. Thank you for carrying these words with me, for allowing me to share not only the pain but also the healing. May you and your families know health, warmth, and joy. And may you never forget that you are worthy of love that shows up, love that stays, love that lifts you even on the hardest days. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.